Hey folks, welcome back. I'm Dave and we're here in my shop where I build E-War guitars. Well, welcome to video number 9 in the tutorial series on how to build an electric guitar. In this video we're going to dig in and do the scarf joint, and we're going to get the headstock glued on. And I come across a couple obstacles during this, and I'll show you how I took care of it too, because that's what guitar building is all about. You come across something, you figure out how to make it right. Anyway, I hope you all dig it. Stick around and check it out, and if you do dig it, how about you give me a like and subscribe. Okay, so it is time to get rolling back on this neck again. I pulled it out of the hot box a little while ago, checked it for straight, and it was off a little bit because that's what the hot box is supposed to do. It's supposed to cause it to do whatever movement it's going to do. I hit it with my bench plane on both surfaces a little bit, got it straightened back out, and now it checks out just absolutely perfect all the way down the thing on both faces. And we want to do that because the next step we're going to do in this thing is we're going to cut our scarf joint in for our headstock, and or for the tilt angle on the headstock. And you want this thing to be just as good as you can possibly get it before you go to doing that, because you want all these angles and stuff to line up when you flip it over and everything. So there's a lot of different videos on YouTube about doing scarf joints, and there's some very good ones on it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set up this camera pointing down here at the bench. We're going to get laying this out, and I'm going to show you all how I do it. So let me get that camera set up, and we're going to get going with that right now. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is I've positioned my neck template on the lowest possible spot I could. Low as in way down this way on the neck blank. I didn't run it all the way down to the bottom because it gets a little, it's a little not good down here. This is where I've got my index and pin and everything, so I intended to cut this end of the thing off. So that's why, so I've slid it down to where the neck is in great shape, nice and straight. And I'm going to lay out the neck on this, and at the same time mark the face of the nut. Okay, so as you can see, here's where the break angle is going to start, this side of the nut right here. So I've got lots of room here because you need that extra room when you're doing a scarf joint. It probably eats up in the wood, in the sense of the wood, the blank you're cutting up, it probably eats up, you need at least an extra 3 inches of length on the headstock to make this work the way we're going to do it. So anyway, so I've got that all laid out now. All right, now I need to get my little square here, and I'm going to square this nut right to there, because I want to see that spot right there. I'm going to square it up on this side too. Right there, okay? So that is where I'm going to make my cut. All right, now here's my jig I have for running through my bandsaw. It's just a standard, like an angle jig, but it's a fixed angle jig. It's not like the other one I did where I could adjust the angle. So this is set, and it's actually set at 13.5 degrees. I was initially going for 13 when I made this a few years ago, but it wound up being 13.5, and it don't really matter. That's just as good. But anyway, so I've set my little angle gauge right here on 13.5 degrees. Let me check to be sure. Okay. 13.5 degrees right there, okay? So now I'm going to come here, hopefully that's in the camera well, and I'm going to set my cut for right there. That is going to be my cut right there, okay? Just for the heck of it, I'm going to go ahead and square this across the back. All right, so now what we're going to do is this piece is going to cut at that angle. We're going to flip it over and we're going to glue it back down so it's now laying at this angle right here. Okay, now obviously that's 1.25 inches thick and that's too thick, so we're going to actually also trim this down. So I'm going to mark that. I'm going to mark it at 5/8 of an inch. So we're going to plane this down later. I'm still going to go ahead and mark it. right here. 5/8 of an inch. I'm going to get my straight edge. Okay, so this is the piece we're going to want. Okay, this smaller piece at the bottom, that's going to cut out and get discarded. And we're going to first cut this angle, then we're going to resaw this down to 5/8 of an inch thick. We're then going to straighten up the two faces of the cuts, which is this side of this face and this side of this face right here. We're going to lay those together, we're going to use a plane, and we're going to clean them up really nice. And then this is going to flip over and glue right on here. And our nut, when it's flipped over, is actually going to sit right here. Right there. Anyway, so, and this guy is going to clamp into my jig right here. I run this guy back to that line is crossing right there. And this line crosses right at the bottom of my template, my guide. So that looks like it's going to be good. So I'm going to throw a clamp on that. Clamp it back tight. Okay, that looks good on there. All right, so now we're going to take this over the bandsaw and cut it out. So that's a really sharp resaw blade on that bandsaw right there. That's really important to keep a good sharp blade on your tool. And I'm also going pretty slow. I've got this footage sped up a bit, but I'm taking my time for sure and you know, going real easy with it. So here I'm clamping those two together, and I'm using my straight edge, even though that's a kind of a rough bandsaw cut. I'm using my straight edge to make sure they plane out as close as possible. And then I lock it down also with the edges of the headstock and the neck as aligned as possible. Of course, I shorten up my plane blade to where it's just clipping just a tiny little bit, because you just want to take a little off at a time, and then you plane it. Incidentally, I see a lot of people doing this with sandpaper on blocks of wood, but I promise you that bench plane right there does a much faster and a much better job. That's such a clean fit when you use a tool like that. It's a pleasure to use, it really is. Of course, I'm constantly checking my square, because that square and the flatness is going to tell you how straight and flat you're going. And those have to be straight and flat, and those joints have to wind up being square too. Very important. Now I'm just checking it in its position that it'll be in too. Going back and checking all the same stuff again. Okay, so we're cut. We planed off both surfaces. I have a super joint here. Came out really nice. And what I noticed, let me shift this around to show you something. Okay, so when the two edges are parallel on the outside, in other words, when the edges of the headstock and the neck itself are running perfectly parallel with each other, I want to show you something I noticed, which is right here. I don't know if you could see that in the camera. When I put my straight edge on the end of the stripe, they're not running true with each other. So that must mean something to the effect of there was a slight little wiggle in the stripes going up the middle or something. So what I've determined to do is, rather than flushing the outside, since the neck itself has plenty of width, so when I cut down based on the center line off of my neck template, I have plenty of width, so that's not a problem. I'm going to actually add to this the headstock part to get the width for the wings. So what I decided to do was, I'm going to turn that at a bit of an angle here. The outsides are on a bit of an angle, but the center is actually the straight part, and that's really the only thing that matters in the end. Okay. Now with my straight edge, that center line is running really nice. And now when I flip it over, you can see those lines line up. This is where it crosses over right here. You can see those lines line up really nice here too. And it didn't before. So you can see here on this edge, I hope you can see it in there, that the headstock, the outside of the headstock is not running perfectly true with this. Remember, we got 11 pieces glued up in here, and there's plenty of room for an accumulative error. So, but I don't think it's an error that we can't do something with, like I said. So I think what I'm doing here is going to be good. I've got now I've actually shoved the headstock up this way just a smidge. So once that's glued on and dried and everything, I'm going to hit the top of this with my block bench plane, and I'm going to flatten those two circles, although they're awfully close now. It's barely, but since we twisted it around, that puts this side, because they were both perfectly square with each other before, that puts this side a little bit that way. So I made sure to have the whole thing up that way enough that it can plane off, and it's going to plane out really nice. So anyway, I think that's good. So I'm going to throw a clamp on this. I'm going to drill a couple of little indexing pins in here so I can make sure I hold this angle on it when I go to glue it up. So the indexing pins I'm going to use in this are a 1/8 inch brass rod I picked up at a hardware store, and I wanted something that was going to fit the hole really tightly where it's not going to move around on me, since I shifted it off of straight with the neck. I wanted to make sure it was going to hold up good, so I went out and picked up some of these brass rods, and it held it really super tight. It worked out really well. So I checked, and everything's lined up good. I checked the straightness again on the stripe, and it looked good. Everything's good. It's ready to go. Okay, so I am ready to glue this thing up. I've fitted it. I've drilled in two little brass, these are 1/8 inch brass rods. These are going to be my indexing pins, because I didn't have a whole lot of room here to play with, because this is got kind of on the narrow side the neck. And I've also cut me a couple little wedge pieces in here so I can get a clamp straight in here and here, and that's what's going to pinch in on the angled part of the neck. So that's going to slide up like so. Going to line it up like that. Remember, it's got a little bit of an offset to get that center line straight. Going to drive my pins in there and then start clamping away. So that's the plan. So these scarf joints can be a little tricky to glue up. I have a jig I made once, but it just never did work out. But I found that use a couple of steel pins or brass pins like that, and those angled blocks that I put on the back of the headstock part, which will allow you to clamp squarely on an angle, which is the hard part. So that really, both between the pins and those little blocks in the back, that was really the way I found that worked the best for me. Okay, so I'm really pleased with the way that turned out. I really am. I think it looks good. I got a nice tight joint, both sides, and I can tell here it's really tight. I've got the stripes lined up really nice up the back and up the front here, even though I had to turn this guy a little bit that way. The important thing to me was, like I said before, keeping these lines straight, because this out here really doesn't matter. It's getting cut off and it's getting added too. In fact, the next thing I'm going to do is I've gotten these two pieces of curly maple that was part of the same wood I built the neck out of, and I'm going to make these two wings for it right here, which we're about to do. And I think I've even got it kind of lined up to where the grain's going to look pretty cool in it too. So that's going to be our next step. I'm going to do that. I'm going to get these guys prepped up. In other words, I got to plane the edges. I'm going to clean up these edges a little bit with my plane. I'm also going to run this plane down this surface here. I left the headstock piece just a fraction proud of this, maybe a couple thousandths proud. So I did that so I could plane these together, true up that end, and I got to plane this face too, but I'm not going to plane this until after I get the wings glued on. But anyway, so that's what we're going to do next. We're going to set up and glue on these wings and get to straightening all this stuff up. So for any of you guys out there that are on the fence about getting a tool like that, bench plane or a block plane or whatever, I'll tell you, I was on the fence for a long time, and I'm just really getting to learn to use the thing. And I'll tell you what, that is a tool you've got to have. I'd have bought one a long time. I mean, I've had it for a while and I've been using it for a while, but Had I known how valuable that tool could be, I'd have bought that thing a long time ago. That's for sure. And I'd have used a shooting board like that a long time ago too, because with tools like that, you can get more accurate and you get more precision out of your work than you can with any of those power tools. So this is kind of a cool little jig here. This is just a little, like a temporary glue up jig. Those are two tapered wedges that, the nice thing about this little jig is you've got the whole thing is pressed downwards flat on a piece of MDF. And so you've got pressure going down, and then use those two wedges to wedge the two wings into place. And that's just a really nice way of gluing up something like this. I've done it before with 10 clamps on the thing, gluing wings on, but that's so much harder to do than this. This is really a nice way to do it. And back to planing again too. And I'm constantly checking when I'm doing this type of thing. I get my square out, my straight edge out constantly to be sure that you're keeping everything trued up, because in the end, that's what's going to count, and that's going to make your guitar play well and feel well and all that. That's a nice little way here. So I thickness once I'm planed on the face, I thickness the back of the headstock on that spindle sander right there, and that's really a good way to do that too. Okay, so I think we've come out pretty good so far. We've got this planed off real nice. I checked with my straight edge in all directions, and it's very flat and nice. And I checked the square on my on the break angle right here. You can see a pencil line I have drawn there. That's perfectly square. My joint here on the face of the under the fingerboard is perfectly square. I went ahead and after I surfaced this face of the headstock, I went and I set my sander over there at just, I set it about 9/16, and then I tightened it up a little bit and it went a little bit under. But so I've got this thing thickness really nice now, a little under 9/16. And you can see I ran a couple marks here, and I ran it right to here, which is basically going to be the headstock side of the volute. So when I wind up cutting this out, you'll see how that comes about. And by the way, remember we're getting this headstock veneer, which this measures 3/32 of an inch right now. So it'll wind up getting thinned down because I still got the bandsaw marks I got to sand off of here. But that'll be my headstock veneer. So I think by the time it's all said and done, we'll thin this down a little bit, and then we'll do a little more work on the thickness of this. We'll wind up with a headstock of about 5/8 of an inch thick, which I think will work fine. So now the next thing we got to do to this guy is I want to go ahead and cut out my shape on the neck and get the headstock cut down to its proper size. Because after that, then we're going to go ahead and put in the truss rod and line it up on those two marks right there. And of course, lining up my nut back on that original spot, which is around 3/16 of an inch back from the break angle. Line this up, and that's how we're going to line up right there. We're going to basically cut like so, like so. Now we're going to go ahead and cut it a little bit big on the bandsaw, and then we're going to flip it over on my router table and router it nice and smooth. So I'm going to put a little double-sided sticky tape on this thing and get this thing going. You know, I don't know why I haven't done it on this template yet, but normally right there up around the nut on the template, I'll drill a 3/4 or 1 inch hole through there. One, I could hang it up on it, and two, you could look down and see through and see to the center line on the neck blank. And I just haven't done it in this. I don't know why. Who knows? It's a little tricky on an angle, cutting on a bandsaw with that headstock on an angle, but you just kind of float it up on the table and it works out all right. Then of course on the router table you're doing it upside down, so that works out okay too. Okay, let me show you something. I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but I see that I didn't notice this before because it had these kind of the rough ends on them, which were not cut straight and everything. So I never really noticed, but once I cut it, maybe you can see it in this one here. All the stripes in here are kind of leaning a little bit that way, off square with the sides of the sides. I mean, it happens, you know? I mean, it's a handmade thing. These are all handmade pieces. Evidently, the only thing I can think of is I planed, it looks like that one I might have planed it a bit out of, not parallel on top. And then so when I glued it and clamped it, though I was very careful to clamp it down onto the granite and everything, it turns out that these guys were leaning a bit. So I don't think it's a big deal. I really don't. I mean, it is a handmade thing. So I just wanted to point out that, hey, not everything goes perfectly as planned, but I think it's going to be all right. We're still flat and square and everything with the outside. It's just my stripes are leaning a little bit, and I'm not crazy about that. But anyway, I think it'll work out in the end. I think it'll be all right, and we're going to proceed on. I just want to show you that sometimes shit happens, you know. Anyway, so let's move on with it. Yeah, I think I just got off planing on those two outside pieces. I promise you, from now on, I will check the squareness or the thickness on those when I plane them. Just got off a bit, but I think it's going to be cool. I really, you know, I think it's going to be fine. I still got a perfect straight line down the center, and I think it's going to be all right. Just kind of wanted to point out how things can go sometimes. That's guitar making. Little mistakes happen like that, and you just got to figure out how to fix it. That's probably half of your job, figuring stuff out. And it's half the fun, too. Well, folks, we better leave it there for now. We covered quite a bit of stuff in this video, and I hope somebody got something out of it. I really enjoy doing these things, and hope you all enjoy watching it. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful week. God bless you, and we'll see you all in the next one.